Good. I'm glad I know most of you, so this is great. All right, here we are. And I won't be able to see you during the presentation, so feel free to just shout out in a sense, and respectfully interrupt is totally appropriate for this presentation. So welcome, ancestry, lineage, etc. at Europa University. So we're going to be discussing today the Ancient Kemetic mark or path, resurrecting the ancestors to empower the descendants. There will be a mix. Well, the beginning is a bit of practice, so to speak, and then there'll be a bit of lecture, and then I'd love to open it up for interaction at the end. So just a quote about my blackness and my black identity. Light interacts with my body, and I appear black. That's my ethos of blackness and how I locate myself there. Okay, so there's a lot of writing on the various slides. You might have to move the various people around if you have the video up. So, like you may or may not have already participated in today, we're going to do another, or your first, water libation of the day. And what is intended by Kemetic Inspired is simply that this is something that, to our knowledge, was occurring in Ancient Kemet, which many of you may have heard growing up as Ancient Egypt. So, for this, I will pour the water and do a libation, and we'll recognize and call forth ancestors into this space. And again, ancestors in 2021 are not just blood lineage ancestors. Your ancestors could be, a family friend lineage, your best friend. It could be through adoption or other means. So it's someone that you were connected to, that was meaningful to you, and someone that you'd like to invite into this space to discuss Ancient Kemet. I will not read every slide, but some slides I will read, and this one I will read. This is transliterated by myself, so for some of you who don't know, maybe transliterated is similar to translation, but it's taking a translation and morphing it to a different context is how I view it. So E.A. Wallace Budge is the European male, cisgender male, that was responsible for much of the Western Academy information we have about Ancient Kemet. They would call it Egypt. So some of the sources that I use are his, and I have transliterated them to the postmodern time with an Afrocentric lens, was the goal. So, pour liberation for our ancestral mother and father who rest in the valley of the awaken. Mayat will witness your action and mark it. Do not forget to do this even when away from Al-Kebulan, home, Africa, Garden of Eden. For as you do for parents and ancestors, your children and descendants do for you also. And now, this part, I guess, will be a bit interactive, if you'd like, but feel free to unmute yourself if you'd like and call forth.
Wait a minute. Can you just say say that last part again? What they do what was that now?
Oh yeah, okay, yeah, I just dropped it on you, and I will explain this a little more after we pour the water. Money, can you give me more water, please? Just fill it up with more water. So the last part, for as you do for parents and ancestors, your children and descendants do for you also. So there's, in the Buddhist terms, I guess, karma is cyclical, and interdependent. Is a Buddhist way of rephrasing that, maybe. But what it offers is a source of accountability in the present moment. Accountability not just to our ancestors, but to our descendants who someday we will be ancestors to.
Right.
So today we're going to do a simplified version of water libation because honestly, back in Ancient Kemet, things were a bit more simplified than they are today, and for the sake of time. So I will be pouring the water and calling a few of my ancestors, and people feel free to unmute and call your ancestors as well, and we will begin the process. After a name, it's customary to say Ashe, and we'll get to that in a moment, and where that concept and terminology and acknowledgement comes from. Okay. Angela Holden, Ashe. Marilyn Taylor, Ashe. Honey Holden, Ashe. Cleve Eversley, Ashe. Minnie Gallucci, Ashe. Guy Gallucci, Ashe. Joseph Christie, Ashe. Liz Christie, Ashe. Chango Reese Boyano, Ashe. Zachary Okum, Ashe. Ashe, Aunt Ruby, Ashe, Uncle Buster, Ashe, Uncle Boots, Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. They're running here today, folks. We brought them quickly. So, and again, real quick, ancestral acknowledgement and beckoning is a part of ancient Kemetic tradition, but it also has roots in other traditions that followed. So location, my location, epistemologically, I guess. Well, not I guess. That's the way I'm looking at this. So gender, I identify as a masculine embodied cisgender male. My spirituality or religion is parenting. My race is black identified with certain unearned lighter skinned privileges. My epistemology is Afrocentric and decolonizing African indigenous. Genetically, I carry ancestors from the motherland, Alkebulan, as a blending of the rich and original civilizations of the planet. I also have ancestors who were of Sicilian ethnicity that migrated to the island of Malta in the prehistoric era to erect the Turksian temples. And thirdly, I have ancestors who were murdered in concentration camps in Germany in the 20th century CE because of our Hebrew blood that migrated out of Africa through the Middle East, Asia, Russia, and back down into Germany to become the Ashkenazi Jews. So a bit more practice. For those folks that aren't practice-based, bear with me. I don't even know who's here, how many people, so I apologize, and you can tune out if this isn't a spot that you'd like to tune in for. So Neo-Kemetic Foundational Oration. What is that? Why did this guy? Okay, Neo, New Age, contemporary, common, Kemetic, we've explained I've explained, the Greeks, maybe I didn't, the Greeks named that land Egypt. The name best known scholarly to be as indigenous as we can find is Kemetic, or Kemet, the land of Kemet, which implies the blackness in the connection to the Primeval. The blackness, the land of the blacks, in the sense that the color of the skin tone was from beige to black in this region, and mostly black from the Nubian ancestry, where it came from, that I'll get into in a moment. And black in the sense that the land was fertile around this Fertile Crescent, which we know those folks that have read the Old Testament, Genesis, which is full of errors in translation, but if you have read it, then very clearly displayed is the location of the Garden of Eden, which is at the root of the Nile and such. So anyhow, so in African American tradition, to a certain extent, probably because of the black codes and other things that restricted our communication when we were first brought here as captives of war, this is typically a call and response. People are welcome to respond. The response is Ashe, Nefer, Ashe. So Neter is fine, but Nefer is a typical articulation of that word. And then the second response is Ashe, Imani, Ashe. So I will say you're welcome to join in all parts of it, but you're welcome to join in none of it, and I can do both myself. But I will begin this now. Nefer, Nun, Ra, Atum, Mayat, Hotep, Ashe,
Hey.
Nefer, Ashe,
Nefer, Ashe.
Alkebulan, Tanahisi, Taseti, Mikinok, Waju.
Ashe, Imani, Ashe.
So typically, this would be orated. Again, this is a contemporary approach to this. This would be orated 5 times to represent the various dimensions or paradigms of being, for the sake of time, and that we're in a duality, talking about things that might be perceived to be beyond that. As we continue forward here, so the primeval. I'll go over a lot of these terms and everything you just said in a moment too. There were no mystical spells cast for anybody who's curious or concerned about that. So the 5 times represent the various paradigms of being. So the primeval, the primordial, the astrological, cosmic, the natural spatial realm, planetary, and the postmordial. And again, the terms that you will hear throughout are terms that these are the best terms that I could come up with in 2021 and 2020, 2019, from within the duality. This is the best I could come up with to try to explain things that are maybe unexplainable or close to unexplainable. Thank you for joining me in that and taking that leap of faith with me. So this is what we were saying. We were getting to the lineage that we're here to discuss a little bit too. And so right here are the definitions in order of how they showed up in the oration, which also is how it's essentially how they show up in the most of our journey lineage here, at least from a Neo-Kemetic perspective. So Nefer represents the primeval, the non-linear before the duality of non-duality and duality. Nun would represent the primordial, lineal time in non-duality and duality. So the beginning of time is what primordial implies, the origin of time. Ra, or Re, represents the cosmic or acosmic space. A cosmic, I might get into a little bit later, but it's more of a concept that that this is all an illusion. But we can get to that. Maybe touch on that in the Q&A. Atum is the next transition, but we'll go over this lineage a lot today. Represents the planetary material space. Mayat, which I pronounce Mayat, other people pronounce it differently, which is fine. But that represents the ethical compass of the ancient Kemetic people that we're going to go over a contemporary version today, a little bit of it. There's 42 laws, so definitely not 42, but about 3 of them we'll go over. Hotep is a Kemetic word rephrased and meaning to be at peace. It's akin to, similar to shalom, let's say, in the Jewish tradition. Ashe, that you all used in the call and response, we've now gotten to a word, is the African Yoruba. I believe you learned something about that earlier from the guest speaker. But it's a philosophical term in the Neo-Kemetic context. It's a philosophical term referencing the intersection of one's power to determine and the humbling acceptance of a phenomena more expansive than ego-based perceptions of self. Alkebulan, presently the oldest resurrected indigenous name for the motherland of Homo sapiens sapiens, aka Africa. You'll hear me using that term a lot throughout. It means mother of life or Garden of Eden. And then Ta-Nehisi is a pretty amazing author, Ta-Nehisi Coates, if you're interested, and intellect. But his name comes from the land of our most common ancestor, which is ancient Nubia down to ancient South Africa, and that encompasses a decent landmass. But as Kiva mentioned in an earlier talk today, these are in relation to the Rift Valley and southeast central Africa. Okay, Bulan. So Taseti is the middle space that sorry, let me apologize. Is the middle space connecting the ancient Nubian insight, the original wisdom, to ancient Kemet, and through the Levantine corridor, it spread to the rest of the world. So it's this middle space, and essentially, Taseti ended up representing, was another name for ancient Kemet, ultimately. But it began as this middle space until unification. And then I'm mispronouncing this name, so I apologize to any indigenous people of the Americas. But Mikonak Waju is one of the indigenous names for the United States of America, where I am presently located, sharing this talk with you. And it refers to America as Turtle Island. And people of Turtle Island are often refer to themselves as part of the Turtle Clan. And I am an imperial presence in relation to that clan. Imani is the faith that there is a mystical, esoteric, and exoteric or natural, which exist as a duality from without a non-duality. The faith that ethical behavior, in accordance to the suggestions of Mayat, will fruit positive energy. Oh, sorry, I have a dog too that hopefully won't be. So now you're probably like, why does this say introduction? This person's he's been introducing this for, but here we go quickly. You've read this already, but I think it bears just to go over real quick. Today we will be discussing briefly, a lineage of the Kemetic timeline, a bit of an introduction into the Kemetic cosmogony, creative narrative, and I'll give a little disclaimer in a moment about that. And then the ethical compass, the laws of Mayat, and the 7 principles of Mayat, of the Kemetic path, mark or way. And, if you've read the introduction, you've read the rest, or you can read it now. And I want to just say that one way that I have chosen personally to interact, now I follow the steps of Chikento Diop and Dr. Ben, and the Africana Studies Department in Cornell University, in the town that I went to college and high school and middle school and grew up in Ithaca, New York. And these folks dug deep into these traditions, and some of them even elaborated on different aspects of the mythology, and the various goddesses and gods and deities and such, or bidoses maybe would be a fairer way, like to bite. Is the power the pharaohs had, and so forth. So I have chosen to incorporate the mythologies into my being, and I know a lot of them. One example would be Atum settling on the Primeval hill and spitting or ejaculating his descendants that then populated et cetera, right? So there's a variety of valid and important mythologies that go along with the information that I'm trying to get to, which is the bones or the skeleton of the mythology. So mythology is often used in many traditions as a way to make insight palatable, esoteric and exoteric ethical insight palatable to a mass of people. But the group that I'm speaking to today is not the mass population. You are a unique population of people that have been engaging in this realm deeply, whether it be named Kemetic or not. So we go forward with that premise. So this is full of disclaimers as we get to this, but I guess disclaimers are part of this entire presentation. So mysticism and ancient Kemet, magic or mysticism, and I said I was going to give, so let me give this disclaimer now. No, this is not, I'm not a part of the skull and bones of Yale or whatever other backwards Eurocentric Western academic pursuit of debauchery that took place when people tried to resurrect, some people, mostly white men, tried to resurrect ancient wisdom and insight from Kemet, which they called Egypt, and they were doing it and they were placing an illusion on ancient Kemet, that it was a place of backwardsness and evil mysticism and black magic, or an origin of Buddhism of sort, in a negative sense. I have not, in my 2.5 years, which is not a long time, but of researching people's materials that have researched these things for decades. No, That's not what I'm here to present today. That's not what mysticism means to me as a Neo-Kemetic Afrocentric researcher and someone who aspires to be on the Kemetic marker path. So we're going to stay away from Neo-Illuminati conspiracy theory stuff today and mythology. And if you're interested, awesome. But there's another time and place for that. Okay, so magic mysticism in ancient Kemet, thank you, Stefan, perfect, was not necessarily an instrument of illusion, is what I'm getting at. To the contrary, most mystical paths of ancient Kemet serve to engage with nature and a cosmic ethical compass and the esoteric aspects of life. And you can probably read the rest here. So a cosmic is, you know, even within this paradigm being an illusion, there's still a sense that this illusion still has an ethical compass. And this is one defense mechanism built in to the Neo-Kemetic tradition to assist with avoiding spiritual bypassing and spiritual narcissism. Well, the narcissism that's something else, but the spiritual bypassing aspect. And who knows how much this gets commodified. I'm not getting paid for this lecture today, so I'm not commodifying it. But you will often see the Kemetic tradition commodified throughout the United States. So, you know, people have to eat. But okay. So, let's see. Is there anything else? Oh, maybe the creation of the external world, this is interesting, was in part through a collaboration with magic, in a sense. That same force is called Heka, at least has been transliterated or translated as that. And it helped to sustain the world, assist with health, or asset with health, because I typed that wrong, and engaged with the end-of-life process. And I should have said processes. And again, the mystical is present in one's moments of conception, birth, life, death, and afterlife. And we'll get into, in a little bit, just how the concept of the cyclical nature of being from an ancient Kemetic perspective. Okay, so here we are today. Etymology. This is what we're here doing today. We're honoring ancestry and lineage. You've probably heard this a couple times today, so I'll be brief. Most of these terms come from Latin, so that's where I'm going to stick with in these three examples. So yes, honor, dignity, office, reputation. We are going to honor and give dignity, honor the dignity of the ancient Kemetic people as a valid high civilization and a valid contributor to the philosophical insight that we have presently. And as a valid form of engagement in a traditional path in 2021. Ancestor, to proceed, to go before. Yes, we'll be speaking of this the entire time. That's kind of the point of bringing Ancient Kemet into this, but also giving acknowledgement of the folks that came before and the beings or entities that came before. We will get into briefly. But I think Kiva and I need to put a whole nother presentation together to discuss the Sapien and the Sphinx, and et cetera. Okay, so lineage, the final term, not being as quick as I said. Line of descent, literally string, line, or thread. So we are going to, yes, exist in this this paradigm of linear time today. We are going to consolidate or morph or transliterate a wisdom tradition that did not conform to linear time, can be reclaimed and recalled and resurrected in this moment. It's something beyond colonization, beyond, it transcends these forms of destruction and debauchery. So that being said, yes, I had, for the sake of my thesis on this subject at Naropa and for the sake of this presentation, I have continued to consolidate, reconstruct nonlinear thinking into a linear presentation, or linear format, and then within a presentation. So, again, yet another disclaimer. You're welcome. Afrocentrism being the southern geographical region, if you hear me speak about this, Eurocentrism being the north, Asiacentrism being the east, and Native Americanism being the west. Now, these aren't typically the way that people locate the different regions of the world, but this is how I've decided to, so I thought I'd share it with you while we continue forward. I will rarely be mentioning these various geographical locations. I just bring it up now to point out why part of my intention for focusing my research on from an Afrocentric lens. And it's because I noticed in the wisdom tradition program that I was in, which was pretty diverse, to be honest with you, at Naropa, and definitely the other the religious studies programs offered around our country are not as diverse as even Naropa's ended up being. In allowing me to write my conduct this research in this way for my thesis at an accredited, a white European accredited university. I haven't found a black accredited university, or I probably would have went there. Okay, so I chose the Afrocentric perspective, one, because I identify a main part of my identity is black identified, but also because it was missing from the traditional approach to wisdom traditions. It was missing, right? That's a funny thing to say. It was subdued. It was shrouded. It was hidden. So it was underneath everything I learned. Every tradition I learned about, kept coming back to the motherland. And the discussion in my mind of the importance of location, of origin, and what that really means. And is it amplified because the reality of our origin has been de-amplified so much? And how does this relate to our present existence, of non-Pangea globalization? So anyhow, I definitely think that the high north traditions, like the Celtic traditions, ought to be more included in wisdom tradition studies or religious studies. I definitely believe that Asia-centric traditions could begin to potentially utilize some of the teachings to empower the people in higher power positions to assist with ending of suffering of others by stopping to oppress other people. And it would be great to engage with indigenous peoples of American approach as something that also includes the valid Olmec input and African input that occurred with the indigenous and the traditions of the West. So Eurocentrism. I will be quick with this because most of us know this, but the dominating perspective for researching Africa and its influences by so-called Western academies, and that's what we're all in, right? We're in this postmodern Western academy experience. That's what we're accredited as everywhere we go here. Is negatively, unless it's an institute, is negatively and blindly Eurocentric. Prominent Eurocentric scholars, for anybody who wants to see exactly how racist Eurocentrism is and where it came from. And this is where our Western Academy came from. That's now the postmodern Western Academy, what's hoping to maybe adjust some of these things, but still from within this lens of this Western Academy. But Carl von Linné, I believe, and as the way to say it, Maximilian Weber, and Carl Jung, he's a pretty famous fella in the psychology movement, and many more pioneered and packaged Eurocentric scholarship, which in itself is inaccurate, ignorant, exclusionary, lazy, classist, gender-biased, anti-queer, racist, and pseudoscientific. In a racist view, Eurocentrism became the foundation upon which post-17th century Western scholarship was supposed. Here's a quick other take on this. I believe, this is not my opinion, I guess, that Western scholarship academies were, the concept behind them was appropriated from the ancient academies of Thebes through Greece. And this misappropriated information has been retooled and made all of those things that I mentioned European scholarship is, before being repackaged again and reiterated to us black identified people as if we don't belong as a part of it. And I believe you're right, we don't belong as a part of it anymore, because what it morphed into is something very far from the roots of the traditional approach to learning and academy and equity that, in my estimation, began in these academies in Ancient Kemet, which we're about to get into in a moment, were highly influenced, if not completely influenced, by the people of ancient Nubia, who were not beige to black, who were black people, which is fine. Because one real quick disclaimer about that, everybody was black. Because we came out the jungle, and we had maybe pink skin under our hair. We lost the skin, the pink skin turned brown, black immediately, the sun came down, and that's all the people that existed during this time frame. This isn't a racist construct, this isn't a this or that, or you versus they. This is a common lineage, which many of us have been separated from because of racist things that began in the 17th century, and you can, again, do your own investigations, but there was no such thing as Africa versus not Africa. There was no such thing as black versus no black. There was all people, and they were all black-skinned, toned, except for some albinism and things like this. But they were all black and brown skin toned, and Africa was just home. It wasn't Africa. It was home. Afrocentrism is pretty much what I just said to you. So you can read the quote there from Mazama, and I think that's a great way to look at it. And I'll take a minute to take a sip of water and then explain a couple of terms, and we'll move on. Or tea, I guess. Check the time. All right, we're good. Okay, so epistemology. The theory of knowledge, especially with regard to its method, validity, and scope. It's recommended that when you engage Ancient Kemet, you utilize this epistemology, Afrocentrism. Location. Afrocentricity as a location, which is a product of an epistemology, is generally opposed to any idea that would supplant the centrality or agency of Africans in analysis of African phenomena. So, for and by the people, essentially, people doing research and engaging in sharing and disseminating that research and engaging in interfacing with the community outside of the academy and scholarly settings ought to be run, sponsored and supported by African identified people and beige to black-skinned people based on the context of what it means to be black identified in the United States in 2021, beyond certain scopes of colorism that have been imposed on us by a Eurocentric system, but which certain light-skinned folks or many light-skinned black people do benefit from as a stratification of a system imposed on us. But we're not going to go too deeply into that now. We can get back into that at the Q&A as well. So, I guess now you could say we're at the bulk or the meat of where we're going today. The evolution of Homo sapiens sapiens. You can see here that the origin is from southeastern Africa, the civilization of this region. The Homo sapiens sapiens, our clinical scientific name, that was there, and then a tiny bit further north we have civilization start. You see this image in the New York Times. I've gone over this a lot, so I'll move on shortly here. But the New York Times put this out, and this is when people started talking about the Eve gene and our. So genetically, 189 people were studied. More studies have happened and more need to happen. But it showed that the vast majority had a common ancestor, 160 to 250,000 years ago, and that ancestor was a black woman. Was the MDMA trait, and then the Y chromosome comes from a black, an African man as well, but we'll get to that a bit later. So, okay. So, now we have the context. Here we are, we're in southeast-ish Africa, chilling out. We're becoming organized a bit socially, so I guess that's what they're calling civilization. And then we start migrating. Why? Why do we migrate north? Why don't we just chill there? It's beautiful, right? We migrate north because as a result of climatic shifts that occurred. And people slowly migrated up to Nubia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Sudan, these places, and then Madagascar is a little bit, but used to be connected at one point. But they come up, and then eventually they went up into ancient Kemet, which a lot of us have heard about as ancient Egypt, and settled along that Fertile Crescent, along the Nile, and the Garden of Eden that the Canaanites spoke of in their Israelite expression in the Old Testament, at least what's left of it. And yes, and as I said a few times, the Nubian civilization or Nagara civilization, they were the ones that envisioned and constructed the religious foundation that the Kemetic people were building upon. And they often, the Nubian monkesses and monks, were the high priesthood, so to speak, and they often were, or mainly, were in the positions of authority within ancient Kemet. And they, in a not patronistically, but they saw ancient Kemet as their descendants or their children, and would see fondly to them, but would also punish them when they weren't necessarily hitting the mark, which is where the terminology comes from. And it's an archery term, but its comprehension is much, much deeper. The Nubian people were the most astute archers this planet's ever seen. Okay, so now we come out of Nubia. We're up here. We're in a divided, a fragmented ancient Kemet. And then it becomes united. We'll get to the dates to people who are that's important too on the next slide. And what begins here is something that a lot of different traditions utilize. And that's what's called this dynastic approach, or what I call here a lineage dynasty-based time period approach, which documents time moving forward, like a river, and that's fine. So the northern region, what we call geographically northern region of ancient Kemet, or North Africa, Northeast Africa, connected with northern Nubia and became this new area called ancient Kemet. Under the pharaoh Arbidos of Menes or Narmer are a couple of the names. And as you can see here in the picture, which I guess I didn't cite this one, unfortunately. I'm sorry, but I have all the citations at the end, and you can email me for any if you need any citations. I tried to cite as much as possible throughout. He is assuredly neither Aryan, Indo-European, nor Semitic, but unquestionably black. So yes, there were beige, darker beige to beige to black to darker skinned peoples, but this specific the beginning of the ancient Kemetic dynasty began with this person who was a dark-skinned black man, and that's great. And there you go. I'm not going to discuss Aryan right now, Indo-European or Semitic, because Semitic, he honestly might have been Semitic, because Semitic is a term that extends actually from ancient Kemet all the way up beyond Jerusalem and Palestine, almost to Syria. So, but not Semitic in the sense that most people now use it to refer to just the white descendants of that region, of the Jerusalem region. Okay, so for all of you that like dates, I know it's hard to do that during COVID. Good luck now. But dates and time. Here we are. This is from Asa Hilliard III, who's a Kemetic Kemetologist, I like to call him. Egyptologist is what's typically people, but in a text called Kemetic Chronology, 1988. A lot of the resources I have are a bit earlier, but again, this tradition hasn't been studied in the way that it deserves to be studied quite yet. So that's where you all, or whoever might listen to this someday in a recording, that's where you all come in. Okay, so I'll briefly go over this. You can see the Dynasty Breakdown. So I guess if you want, you can say 3100 BC for the folks that want to connect this to other traditions. It's probably more accurately, 4000 or, to 3500. But yes, this is the dynastic. There was a pre-dynastic era of ancient Egypt that goes back to 5500 BC. But yeah, right now we're talking Menes probably, was looking over a united Kemet about 5,500 years ago. And what is it to the Jews? It's what, 58, 21, or 22 now. So, but typically the time frame for the ancient Kemetic people goes back to the time of, humbly goes back to the time of the Sphinx, which is much. Again, another time we'll get into that, but there's some concepts that there were millions of years here, and but that's stuff for you to, again, this is an introduction, so springboard. Okay, so yes, so the dynasties end with, it looks like, and everybody, and most Eurocentric scholars would tell you it's Persian colonization, and, somewhere between, I don't know, 525 to 332 or whatever, with other people coming in there in and out. Now, before the Persians, the Nubians actually came and smacked around the ancient Kemetic people for a variety of reasons I don't have time to get into, and just greatly depleted Kemet's military. So when the Persians came in, they were kind of ripe for the taking. So the Persians were able to take them in 340 BCE. So this is before the Common Era, right? Before Black Yahweh. Anyway, and then the Greeks came in, they're the ones who named it Egypt, as you can see here in this little image. Then the Romans, then the Vandals, and that gets me to a point about vandalism. The Vandals is what all of them should be called, but ancient Kemet has been vandalized since this time period. It's over thousands of years, which makes it relatively challenging to re-engage with. So essentially, this is similar to Buddhism that was found. The most recent iteration often is the one from Tibet that was found by European scholars digging through, a colonized area of theirs and finding stupas and so forth, if I'm not mistaken, probably with a lioness on top. But anyway, because I believe that's how Buddha was represented for a while, and then as a black man. And, it's similar, yeah. So this had to be resurrected from the tombs. And most of these tombs and relics and places of worship were vandalized, treated with incredible disrespect, and as some of people have spoken to in other talks today, the karma, the action that may be interdependent to the action of attempting to destroy the physical insight, that action, that karma, may be rough. However, the Vandals came in 429. And then we have the Arabs, and the Arabs are the Egyptian ethnicity that most of us grew up knowing, or all of us, because we're not that old. Well, in the physical form. The Arab ethnicity is the ethnicity of the Egyptian people that we grew up knowing. And then there's European slavery, Arab slavery, and European colonialism, and then there was Egyptian independence relatively recently in the 21st century. There you go, for all the folks that enjoy that type of stuff. Okay, let's get into the bulk, or not a bit, you're gonna do your own investigation, but let's get into the introduction to some cosmogony, right? Creation narrative to a certain extent. That's kind of how I view cosmogony. And then there's cosmology, which is a little more astrological, let's say, but they're very closely connected, and the words are often, maybe mistakenly, but we don't need to play that Western academic game, but they're often used interchangeably. They may be here a little bit too, so there we go. So you can read here while I'm speaking. Yes, so one thing I will say is that this ancient sacred symbolism that came from Hermopolis, Heliopolis, and the City of the Sun, and Memphis and Thebes, not only were they extensive and deep, but they were, and philosophically astute, but they included origin narratives, a supreme and universal non-dual goddess or god would be the terminology, but Nefer, right? You're going to hear a bit about, you'll be pretty accustomed to some of this terminology by the end. GD to the Jewish folks, or God. Krishna, right? Adonai, Krishna, the black one, which, you can go on that journey yourself. Adonai, Eloheinu, the Lord or God. Jah, and etc. There's many traditions that have other terms for this supreme, universal, absolute entity. Now, Nefer may gets complex as well, and we'll get into the complexities of Nefer that may differentiate themselves from the complexities of the other entities, or the other names for this concept. Let's see, and that's about, yeah, there you go. And I think I've made it clear that, okay, well, the intention of many of the ancient Kemetic cosmogonies appeared to be to articulate the complex relationships between various forces of one's personal realm, the natural world, and the metaphysical and cosmic planes of existence and post-existence, right? The non-dual primordial and postmordial. So part of what I've been engaging with is this non-dual tradition of Ancient Kemet and how it shows up in the contemporary, if you haven't already picked up on that. And maybe even a bit in addition to non-dual conceptology. So here we are, Kemetic Cosmogonies, Part 2. Where are we at time-wise? 3:50 I started. Okay, we got this. All right. There are universal and foundational ancient Kemetic concepts regarding creation, which were discovered and studied in spatially and non-spatially based subcosmogonies and have been established by Afrocentric Kemetologists as the evolution of Kemetic cosmogony. So there's a couple of the names of people that you can look into if you'd like to write those down. But now I'm going to get into the insight here, and the deep philosophy, or for the Buddhist in the room, if there are any here, the Abhidharma of sorts for the ancient Kemetic people here. The concepts, again, basic introductory level. Email me if you'd like to know more. I have my emails at the end of this presentation. The concepts are modernly termed, concepts regarding the cosmogony, the primeval, right? The before the duality of non-duality and duality. So there's duality and duality, and then there's this concept of before, which isn't the right term, but that's the term that I have to use here within the duality, and I'm just sharing that disclaimer with you. But because it's not before or after, because that's a linear time frame, but let's just say within a linear construct, before the duality. And what's that duality? Non-duality and duality is in itself a duality. Now the primordial is time in non-duality and duality. So time, the primordial, there's a primordial non-duality, and there's the beginning of time in a non-duality sense, and there's a beginning of time in a duality sense. And for the sake of this discussion, the primordial is the beginning of time, is what we'll just say today. The astrological infers the metaphysical, this middle space, right? Or the cosmic plane or realm or paradigm. The astrological is the metaphysical, the space, it's space, material and matter realm as a duality. And then there's the postmordial, which is after the duality of non-duality and duality. Again, after is not the correct terminology because I don't know of the correct terminology at this present moment. And I haven't established how to speak of something beyond the duality from within the duality. So that's just the disclaimer. And real quick, these 5 paradigms of being, let's say, are a cyclical interplay. These are stages of a cyclical interplay that is of the utmost significance to overstanding a universal or absolute cosmological path as perceived by the ancient Kemetic people. So now let's dig a little bit deeper, because you didn't ask for it, into the Kemetic cosmogonical lineage, because that's what we're here to do today. So primeval, the primordial spaciousness, right? Neter, we've been talking about her a lot. So let's say that would be, if we must, because often we must, if assigned gender, this would be the divine, the base of existence, the feminine base of existence. Now, primeval, pre-primordial spaciousness is just that, spaciousness. In other traditions, maybe in the Hebrew tradition, it would be referred to as, let's say, the source. The Christian mystics would say that this is the endarkenment that you fall back into. It's beyond, or with, it's beyond existence and non-existence, or even the plausibility of that. So next would be noon. Next is also not, but whatever. Next would be noon, embryonic pleroma, which is often, referred to or connected to the primordial realm. So the beginning of time. And this realm is still spaciousness, but it's spaciousness with momentum, not matter. Is the best way I've thought to explain it, and I've been thinking about it a lot, to how to explain it outside of my, like inside it's pretty easily internalized. But, so spatial expression of, next, atum, our spatial expression of the primordial realm as a reflection of Re or Ra. And again, these terms, I am coming at them not in the mythological sense, or in the social or political ancient Kemetic sense. I'm coming at them in strictly the ancient Kemetic cosmogonical sense, in a transformative way, connecting it with the Neo-Kemetic approach that we are resurrecting presently, and that has begun being resurrected, in my understanding or overstanding, since the 1960s by Afrocentric Egyptologists in the United States, and connecting with Afrocentric Egyptologists still in the motherland, Al-Kabula in Africa. So Atum, in this sense, would be this spatial, and spatial implies material of the primordial realm as a reflection of Re. So Re often as well was referred to as, I was at Re still, I believe. So the time now between primordial, the beginning of time, and the spatial realm. So Re is a middle space of sorts. And Re was often referred to in different various aspects of the Kemet tradition as the sun, okay? And the sun, what is the sun? In many traditions, the sun is the source, okay? The sun is what illuminates, right, and enables existence as a existential, as a experience outside of noon. So the cosmic, okay, so then the spatial realm follows Re, Atum, and that's the spatial or material expression of the primordial realm as a reflection of Re. So all of this is connected, however, they show up in different ways, and now this is getting close to, this is the world, this is the spaciousness, the duality that we play in, that we feel stuck in often as well. And within this duality, there's the cosmic realm, which we sometimes interface with, but not always, right? We mainly exist in this indigenous realm, what I'll get to in a bit here. So in this cosmic realm, there are a few folks that have been determined, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, and Nut. And again, the gender infliction really began, Nefer is often seen as maybe this primeval feminine energy of sorts, or spaciousness, but really, androgyny begins before the duality, and the duality is then gender. So Atum would show up androgynous, and Re or Ra would be beyond androgyny, would be beyond gender, or not gender. In the cosmic realm, two of these four beings take on, two take on the feminine, two take on the masculine, and through them, a tradition and a lineage of deities exist, and they have a lot of ontological and practical power to them, and I hope that you investigate and study them. So the divine realm is thought, Mayat, Anubis, and yet more. And now these are literally, they can sometimes show up as entities in this realm, in the indigenous realm, but often they act as a in between for the cosmic realm and the Pharonic realm. Or I didn't add this realm, and I apologize. Or the monkish or monk realm of the Nubians. So these are, I guess, akin to maybe saints or demigods in the Greek tradition. It's probably where demigods came from, actually. So, and this is where we get to briefly, because I'm already being long-winded here, to the Zeptepi and the Septepi, the first time we're walking with the gods traditions in this culture, and how this aspect of our being is a part of our lineage. And again, please just you have a pen and paper, write them down and go on your own search. Next would be the Pharonic realm, and then next is the indigenous realm of the people of the Nile. And this is again within the Kemetic cosmogonic lineage. We have Temeri, Tanahisi, Merdo, Cush. We go out beginning after the Garden of Eden. We begin with black African Adam, which is the Y chromosomal DNA, and black Eve, which is mtDNA. Of Al-Kebulan. Eventually their lineages translated through the Levantian coriander to present-day people, i.e. the black skin-toned Noah or Nu lineage, among other lineage streams that did or did not maybe go into India and other places. Okay, so Mayat as an ethical compass. The ethical practices of the Kemetic people were said to have been founded in the goddess, or Nefer, Mayat, the divine feminine. Now, both the exoteric and mystical religious Kemetic paths were inseparable from one's physical journey. So there was no separation. There was no transcending, and that's not how it worked here, but there was no passing on and not having to return to this existence when you stood in front of the presence, when your entity, whatever you show up as, this disembodied presence, when your disembodied presence sat before Mayat, this was not you were not able to transcend without conforming to a certain extent or holding up an ethical value system, a compass. There was no separation there. So that's pretty much all I want to say about that, is that ritual, practice, no separation, and definitely not in the Neo-Kemetic traditional approach to this. This is, again, another safety to avoid spiritual narcissism, sexual and spiritual misconduct, and gurification. Okay, so moving along for the sake of time, Ancient Laws of Mayat 1. Mayat is an overarching virtuous ethical guiding compass, as I said. It was expressed in the Doctrine of Mayat. It was found in the Papyrus of Ani, if you're interested. And take a few seconds to write down what you need to, and we're going to move to the next slide because I'm being a bit long-winded here. But essentially what I just want you to know is that the narrative around Mayat, and there are mythologies around her as well, but really what it gets at, the crux of it is around this afterlife cycle of rebirth or awakening, is the terminology we use in the postmodern Afrocentric scholarship. And this is one place in wisdom traditions where the cycle of rebirth and multiple existences and so forth showed up. Now, this is an important thing that Kiva did mention earlier, that when the trajectory and how you approach these laws, and there was 42 of them, and I'll just read this quickly. The moral order in the 42 negative confessions is the historical basis for the 10 commandments. However, some changes occurred since these ideas left Egypt via the departing Israelites. The departing Israelites and others. First, the idea of conscience, I have not killed, was replaced with the idea of force outside your head, imposing a command, thou shalt not kill. So as we go forward, I just want you to see how, at least how I've transliterated the Mayatian laws into the contemporary, they are, and they always were meant to be taken as an exclamation of pride as you sat before, or lay before, or stood before Mayat. You were exclaiming joy and jubilation for having lived to these standards of perfection, of hitting the mark. And
That's a
in
great
hitting
point.
the mark,
That is a really important point. Yeah.
yes, and in this hitting the mark, you are connecting, reconnecting. It's one of the aspects of our reconnection, because a lot of people want to do the reconnection, right? Is reconnecting with ourselves, which is a piece of Nefer, right? Which is a piece of before the before. The word I don't have a word for. So anyway, that trajectory, as Kiva said, and as Wamba said as well, is very important. So here we go, and I guess we'll get to the Q&A at 4:15. I apologize. I don't mind staying a little bit late, but I understand we will be done at 4:30, and we'll have 15 minutes for Q&A. So the ancient laws of Mayat, example number 2. So here, oh wait, hold on, no. Example number 1 comes before. See, linear, I was trying to get the damn thing, always catches up with me. Okay, so ancient laws of Mayat, example number 1. So this is, on the left you see italics, and that is the E.A. Budge Wallace, the Eurocentric translation from the Papyrus of Ani, which was stolen, which was found in ancient, in modern day Egypt, and brought to, in modern day, early 1900s, 20th century Egypt, and brought and confined mostly still till today in the British Museum, where most antiquities from around the world are housed. And I recommend that QAnon supporters and the rest of these folks storming capitals can go storm that place and reclaim some of these traditional artifacts so that we can start to dig deep. But that's the most politics you're going to get from me today. Okay, so I have not committed sin is E.A. Budge's translation of the hieroglyphics. Okay, the word etched in stone by the divine ancestors, let's say. I have, this is not, and then on the right, not in bold necessarily, but in bold maybe, I have re-articulated or transliterated the ancient wisdom through the Eurocentric perspective in an effort to decolonize it and reclaim it, not in an effort to conform to it. But there's a thin line, and I respect criticism in this engagement as well. This is a process. This is a living tradition. The Afrocentric, the African Wisdom Academy of Speaks, our wisdom approach, is a wisdom tradition out of Thebes and out of Nubia that is a living tradition, and we add to it. I have strived towards virtuous practice and to sustain moral action which aligns with the 7 ethical principles of Mayat. We'll get to the 7 principles in a second. Ancient laws of Mayat, and the principles will close out the talk, so we will be done, like I said here. So ancient laws of Mayat, example number 2. 7, which has significant to the 5% nation of gods and earth. Much respect, brothers. Stay on your square. Okay. But we can get into some of the limitations and practicality of Muhammad and such. Okay, so 7. I have not stolen the property of the gods. Okay, that's E.A. Budge's translation in 1903 or so, maybe 1898. I have not idolized oneself or any other self as superior. I have abstained from elevating oneself or any other self to a higher mystical status, guru is one example, than any other being is capable of transcending. That is, in my estimation, a neo-Kemetic approach to not stealing the insight or wisdom of the gods. Stealing, I imply to mean hoarding, and God, I imply to connect back to ancient wisdom. That's an extension of our pre-primordial wisdom from Nefer. From is not also the right way to say it, but I explained at the beginning we're going to be in linear time here. unless some of you took some psilocybin or this is some extended ayahuasca trip. I am not, so I am in linear time. So, Ancient Laws of Mayat, example 2, number 28. Okay, 9 minutes. I am not a man of violence, is the last law we'll look at. That's Ye Budges. I have not imposed more than necessary upon oneself or any other self. Now that is an Aikido mantra of sorts from an Aikido sensei, and I don't unfortunately remember the name of that sensei at the moment, but I want to give basic credit to that person. The threshold of necessity can only be established by the one who is holding the lower status or role power in the power paradigm. I have been free of violence or perpetuating violence is what you would exclaim, or what we all will exclaim when we, or when, in whatever form, we arise or descend in front of Mayat. So, now the New Kingdom to postmodern Mayat, right? So Mayat isn't the same necessarily. She doesn't show up the same as she did 5,500 years ago. I mean, not a lot does. All right. So the 7 principles of Mayat were translated by postmodern Egyptologists and chematologists as truth, justice, balance, order, compassion, harmony, and reciprocity. All right. The embodiment of these 7 principles is paramount to reactivating this wisdom and the Kemetic pathway or mark. Now, truth, essentially the bulk of truth, and I'll let you read this here, but you're only going to have a couple minutes for each page, but we do close out on this essentially. Truth in this sense is, I'm going to focus on halfway down, to be worthy of being trusted. One must behave, I know this is a high standard, but we'll get to this in a second, almost perfectly, or on the mark, in a trusting manner, inherently and intentionally. Empathy, in the Neo-Kemetic perspective, is an extension upon truth and is signified through one's trusting of the trustworthy as an acknowledgement of risk and support for those whom practice trustworthy behaviors and actions. Essentially, when someone actually puts in the effort to be trustworthy, which is a challenge and an everyday process, they ought to and they deserve to be acknowledged and rewarded for that. And maybe through that reward system, we might begin to bolster and encourage trustworthiness as an attribute important to existence. So justice, aligning with the duality of order and chaos. Mayat was born when the infinite became finite and the duality arose indirectly from the non-dualistic phenomena of the non-dual primordial Nefer, right? Okay, great. But essentially, it's to be in tune with both of these aspects of the duality. And again, this is a process, and this is an introduction. A leaping pad, or what do they call it? Springboard, stepping stone. Okay, good. Balance, accepting this pendulum we just referred to between justice, order, right? This finite sense of finite, and injustice, chaos, infinite. The balancing of order or expansion in different traditions and chaos, contraction in a different tradition, implies that the duality holds both justice and injustice equally as possible, but not identical in their impact. Again, this is not in regards to ethics. This is a separate discussion from ethical compass. As I said before, an ethical compass is a component, a required component, but a component nonetheless of the path towards not recycling yourself back through this material existence in regard to connecting and abiding by the law and the path, the Kemetic path through the laws of Mayat. So order is the finite experience. The finite experience is supposed to have arisen from the infinite, right? As we talked about in this tradition. The traversing of the finite is the path upon which the totality of the Mayatian complexity is found. I've been saying this entire time. Unfortunately, again, for all of us who are not on ayahuasca right now, this is a duality, and we are chock stuck within it. And it's material and pretty hard too. And unless you're seeing the green matrix, and even if you are, you're still going to run into the door and fall down. Compassion. And then we have reciprocity, and we'll close this out here. In this sense, compassion is holding space for oneself and every other self, which is a term from Professor Stephen Hatch, who I believe is no longer professor at Naropa, but I wanted to give him a shout out. He taught me much about Black mysticism, Howard Thurman, and the way to engage in endarkenment and reclaim the blackness of Yahweh as a reflection of myself if I wanted to, and chose to do so, which I haven't, but it's an option. Okay, so compassion is holding space for oneself and every other self, to be fallible, all right, to be prone to error, but not beyond accountability, ignorant and unbalanced in our collective efforts of hitting the mark. I've been making this hitting the mark an individual experience because we're all sitting here in America, right? This is actually, which we can discuss in another lecture, that's not an introduction, you know, if Naropa ever wants to endorse this type of wisdom tradition, or if they can, this hitting the mark is or can be seen as a collective effort. But for the sake of time and the limitations of the Western Academy, we're going to be looking at this as an individual path today, I guess. But most often, hitting the mark is often connected with reconnecting with the infinite, right? The non-duality, the Nefer, the Adonai, the Allah, Jah, God, Source, Krishna. And again, these aren't exact transliterations, the names of the various forms, but I just wanted to try to give a little shout out to anybody who might be holding different spaces. Harmony, the final one actually, sorry. The result of one's journey towards the re-embodying the foundation of the principles of Mayat. This is the reward, people. This is the reward of this hard work, of hitting the mark, of recycling over and over again, of continuing to go and exclaim our joy to Mayat, when we already know that we haven't followed through with all of it and we're going to be recycled, but we're still happy just to receive a bit of acknowledgement before what happens next, which Kiva can explain to you another time, which is a pretty incredible regurgitation or whatever. But this is the harmony that comes with transcendence, for lack of a better word, but from hitting the mark and reconnection with the source ancestry, a source ancestor, beyond ancestry and non-ancestry, beyond time and no time, beyond space and no space, this pre-primordial spaciousness, Nefer. Reciprocity, keep lying about how many. The process of traversing the in-between space found between finite and infinite. And then now, because I told you 4:15 and we're at that now, here's a picture of the Pyramid of Eunice in ancient Africa, or ancient Egypt, or modern day, ancient Kemet, modern day Egypt. This is where the oldest religious text was found on the planet at this point in time, from the Pyramid of Eunice. And this is where a lot of insight came from in this process. And here you go. Here's the selected bibliography that I'll put up here for one moment. And then I will offer a 15-minute Q&A for anybody who has any questions. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly at the end, but you can email me for any information if you'd like about any of these sources, but I just want you to know that this is, if it was, it would still be credible, but this comes from a decent amount of research with literary research mainly. And here's my email, antkaya25@gmail.com, and my website, anthonygalucci.weebly.com. And I will leave this up here for another couple seconds while you all think of a question or a comment you might have for the last 15 minutes, and then I will open it up to the group. So please, everybody, take at least 60 seconds to process if that was something that needs to be processed. And then and I'll open it up for questions in a moment. All right. Does anybody have any questions or comments for the last 13? It's a lucky number in ancient Hebrew. It means God, I guess. And love. Or one, no, sorry, it means one and love. So connected, it's one love, which connects to mean God. Okay, anyway. Any questions about a tradition that was a little bit before?
I have a curiosity. So I'm imagining then, as people left Africa, they're taking these traditions, wisdom, the Kemeticism, I'm probably saying it wrong, out into the world. And then the piece that I'm curious about is like this, as I'm understanding Nefer right now, the divine feminine, and you see divine feminine show up in, indigenous traditions all over the world. You see it even in like in Catholicism. I don't know why I'm stumbling all over my words. And am I connecting something that's really there? And if you have any thoughts on that, and
Yes, I do. So the thoughts are twofold, I guess. So there would be, in a practical sense, in ancient Kemet, as I was explaining briefly, there were the monkesses and monks, which is a priesthood of sorts, right? A priestesshood. And they held this space, this middle space, connecting the indigenous, like the experience that we have, to a more mystical experience, let's say. But so in the practical sense, yes, the divine feminine would have been connected to them. And the ancient Kemetic person growing up in a very, from what I've understood, there were concerns with the social and the political things in ancient Kemet, which is a whole other discussion. But walking around in ancient Kemet, you would look with revelry, or with reverence at a priestess, a monkess of Isis, let's say, is one of the, and the Isis Papers is a great text to get into. That's not necessary, but that's relatively connected to this as well. But there's ways that it's been reclaimed in the contemporary as well. So yes, practically, the divine feminine showed up as an actual divine feminine, and right now it would show up. Maybe we'd call it a black witch or something. Would be how maybe the terminology in the U.S. right now is starting to be reclaimed. Okay. Now, in regards to, and again, that's not my terminology, but it's the terminology that is being reclaimed. So, in regards to the divine feminine beyond being in the mortal form or something, or being in this flesh form, which is a thin line to a certain extent in ancient Kemet, Nefer, would exist beyond, all the way, a tomb even would exist, but once you're within it, gender is within a duality, and once you're within a duality, then gender arises, and this tradition did appear to see gender as, they did seem to see divine gender as connected to the cisgender woman's divine ability to produce life in the material world. So that was a connection that did occur. It appears that it did occur in ancient Egypt, and that connection that I think you're alluding to definitely shows up in many other traditions. Now, how it got there, yes, most likely, according to anthropological research from an Afrocentric perspective, from Chicanto Diop and others, but from a genetic perspective, there's plenty of people now that have genetic studies have now superseded carbon and radon studying that we used to have to rely on. Now it's not really much use arguing this. I just more talk about the origin because this discussion today is on lineage. If it wasn't, I would have stuck, the whole discussion would have been on Mayat and what we can do to activate it in the contemporary. But today they asked me to speak on lineage and so forth. So yes, it most likely, the feminine aspects of having a physical feminine divine representation most likely migrated out of Northern Africa, and also the concept of the source being divine feminine also most likely based on DNA, because, and like I said earlier, it wasn't, and this is beyond black and white or African or non-African, this was wisdom, and this was insight that was being developed and challenged and questioned and threatened. Again, after we had already colonized a lot of the other the other hominids. But before we had, this is a bit before we colonized the Neanderthals, apparently. But anyway, yes, absolutely. These traditions and matriarchies have been found throughout El Kabilan, or throughout pre-colonized traditions. Patriarchy existed prior to the European Enlightenment in this new form of patriarchy, but a maternalistic approach and societal structure was more free to openly express its value and contribution. And without the contribution of not only the divine feminine, but the feminine approach to social and political construction, we are not experiencing a holistic embodiment of being. And we are, Kiva mentions this in other stuff, but we are walking around like it feels like we're walking around with half of our limbs. Some of our limbs are sleeping on purpose sometimes. So. But yes, thank you for bringing that up. That being said, more research ought to be done on that subject, and more research has been done than I've done on that subject, and you can find that using some of the databases at Naropa. And Queen Ifra, who I put in the... Because you asked, here she is, Sacred Woman, A Guide to Healing the Feminine Body, Mind, and Spirit. It is a bit older now, 20 years, but I would look that up. That's a guidebook on how to engage the Neo-Kemetic path from a Black feminist epistemological lens, and how to activate some of the principles I talked about today, which we did not talk about activating on purpose, because this is an introduction, and we'll how to turn concepts into praxis is a bit more of a process. So, but let me see. There's a question here. Oh. Okay, so the question in the chat here is, what language were the laws of Mayat written in? So Medu Neter is one name for hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics is the Greek name for the form. And, this is the part where, but like many traditions, yes, it would be said that the Nubian people did see it as a tradition, as a language, as an expression of a power beyond the ego of oneself. And they translated that to the Kemetic people. So, like Sanskrit and Hebrew and other Semitic languages and that, Armenian and so, it was seen as the language of the gods of sorts, or something being, a transmission, a language of transmission, and in this way, it kind of follows a hierarchy of language where, let me go back to the beginning, let's say transmission, right? Just transmission without verbal or without nonverbal or verbal. And then I guess we go to oral tradition is the next level, right, that people talk about. And then after that, we get to Medu Neter, which is symbolism or hieroglyphics. The only language that the language that shows up the most prevalently today, and one of the only languages that still uses symbols, is the root of the Chinese script. But most other languages have just morphed in a different direction, which is fine. It's not evolved or devolved, it's just morphed in a different direction. But symbols is one dimension, and then we move on to the text, the written languages that we have that use symbolism, but they become more ethnic, related to ethnicity and one's identity. Less universal when we move away from symbols, potentially. And then we go towards, yeah, I don't know, maybe text messaging or something. But so we're, or whatever emojis are. Well, emojis are kind of getting back to hieroglyphics. So my point is, though, that the hieroglyphics, the Medu Neter, was a symbolism based, which I view as an advanced form of communication, not as advanced as maybe oral or transmission, and only in the sense that as you go through these, the morphing of language, no problem, Stefan, it becomes more restrictive. So, a transmission, everybody can receive a transmission. And in the Hebrew tradition, there were hundreds of people that received a transmission from Eloheinu, from God, all right? But they only took the male's perspective and ran with it or whatever. So it's that type of party. So anyway, sorry. But the transmission is open. There's no restriction to a transmission. Anybody can get a transmission from a tree or a stone or a cat or your friend or your mother or your son or your daughter or whatever it is, right? So that's open source information. The next, oral, you kind of have to meet the person, right? And then it requires kind of this guru thing, which leads to a bunch of problems, as we all know about. And then after that, you got these symbolism, which how the heck, you look at these symbols and you're like, how do you understand this? So it's still very secret, mystical. The root of mysticism is secret, right? Which is essentially alienation. So like, yes, it's really mystical and secretive, which means it's kept from people not in power. Okay, so then we move on, and back then that was a class-based thing more so than other factors, is what I was trying to get at, Sophia. Like it probably was, Ancient Kemet was definitely, there was class hierarchies there, or caste system of sorts. And then you get to this, so then there's the oral, you have to meet the guru or the imam or the rabbi, right, or else you're not going to know anything. And then the next one is, and then the closer you've been to the guru, the more credible you are, or the closer you were to the transmission and you're able to share whatever. So then next is the text, which makes it even harder, so you can't even listen to the dude. Like, it's harder to text is even, in theory, well, text is a two-way sword, but text then, puts it down, so I won't get it. But then there's text, which can be utilized as a technology for inclusivity, but it's often used to not in that regard. So, and then let me get to your other questions so that we end at least only a minute late or something. Yes, and please do more research. If or when this tradition is able to be studied, there would be an aspect of it that would be, studying Medu Neter and so forth. Now, the Rosetta Stone is the tool that was used because the Greeks put down some hieroglyphics and then they put the translations on there. So that Rosetta Stone is what people use to translate the hieroglyphics that you see online if you Google my name in hieroglyphics or whatever. Oh, yeah, that's a really good question, and I guess I'll close on that. I'm currently a PhD student at CIS in East and West Psychology. Thank you, and working with the developing Black Psych department or movement out there that's happening in the Bay right now. So it's kind of fun to be a part of a movement or be observing it anyway, because I'm new. And I'm hoping to bring I will be bringing a black masculinity approach or archetype into the discussion from an Afrocentric framework. And now I said the word archetype, which might seem like it's within the restrictions of Carl Jung, which to a certain extent it's related to a certain extent because there are non-black masculine people, and they will be acknowledged in the dissertation, but they won't be engaged with very often. This will mostly be about, like my thesis here at Naropa, it'll be mostly about extrapolating and resurrecting a black masculine archetype and researching what it looks like in 2021. So that's how I will bring Ancient Kemet into the present in my research, is maintaining this Afrocentric approach that acknowledges Ancient Kemet and Ancient Nubia as a foundational and valid aspect of knowledge and the transmission and morphing of knowledge over time. The postmodern Afrocentric wisdom experience. So thank you all for joining. We are 2 minutes over, according to Google or Apple or whatever. My email was there. I'm still at Naropa. I'm an assistant professor's assistant, not an assistant professor, no. Professor's assistant in the diversity class in the yoga studies and religious studies master's program, if you find yourself there. But I'm still engaged here, and I look forward to connecting with you all in the future. Thank you for your time, Hotep, and in the most sincere way that I could say this, one more time, I appreciate your time, even if you're tuning in the future or in the past, to see this someday or already, because time appears, it really appears, the Buddhists love talking about this, but time appears to be one of our cherished or most blessed commodities. So let's cherish it. I cherish you all. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you.